Welcome to the Hesitant Homesteader. We're glad that you are with us today. We thought it would be really important to have a video talking about some of the things we can prepare for in case some things shut down or the world doesn't look the way that we are used to it looking.
Yep. So in today's video, we're going to spend just a few minutes. We're going to give you our top 10 topics to consider for being prepared in case of an emergency. We're not going to cover these in detail. We're going to give you a little bit of information, but we're going to put some links to some helpful websites in our descriptions. And of course, you can do your own due diligence. We just wanted to give you the topics to get you thinking about this in case you haven't been. So stay tuned. Top 10. Shelter, super important, right? Don't take for granted that just because you currently live in a house that you're always going to have shelter. You need to think in advance to prepare, to have a mindset where you play out different scenarios and say, what would happen if we couldn't stay at our house? Or what if we had to stay at our house for a really long amount of time and we can't leave our property? So shelter would mean make sure that the house that you currently have is secure. Make sure that it's adequate. All of the water, electrical, roofing, windows, your heating, everything, all the systems in that house are working properly and repaired in good working condition. So should you have to shelter in place for a number of weeks or months even, that you can do that. Shelter could also mean if you need to bug out, which is a term that they use if you have to leave in a really quick amount of time. Something could happen in your area. You know, you could have fires moving in, you could have any number of scenarios. We won't even get into those, but for any reason, should you be forced to leave where you're at, what kind of mobile shelter what are you going to have? You know, some people invest in like mobile homes, recreational vehicles, things like that. Other people recommend against that. Certainly it could be as simple as camping tents or things like that. Shelter could also mean that if you leave, you're going to go from point A, which is your house, and travel to another predetermined location where there's already shelter. It could be a pole building, a barn, another person's house that you've got an agreement with. So do your research online, look this up, but shelter is one of the top things you have to have. You won't survive long if you don't have adequate protection from the elements.
All right, something else that you need to consider is your long-term food storage. That typically means that you need to put in some kind of a garden and start growing some of your own food so that you can store that away. So right now I would be online getting some seeds ordered, going through the catalogs and making sure that you have a collection of those ready to go so that when it's time to start seeds, you've got what you need. Another thing to consider is if you have animals on your farm or even in your backyard, if you are planning to get animals, you need to make sure that you have a source for them to be fed. You don't want to run out of food in the middle of all of this. If there's not a way to just go pick it up at the feed store or whatever, you need to make sure that you have a little bit of stock ready to go so that they aren't going hungry, because if they're hungry, they can't provide food for your family.
So another thing to be thinking about is having adequate water supply. If you have a well, you're going to want a way that you can pump the well by hand. Keep in mind that you're going to also need a water supply not only for yourself, but for your livestock, gardening, and cooking.
So another thing you're going to want to think about is transportation. You may be staying home a lot more, but you're still going to need to get around, and there may not be a lot of access to fuel. History's proven that gas stations run out of fuel really quickly when they're not getting resupplied. So you're going to want to really think through your trips, whether that be into a friend's house in town or out in the country. You're just going to really want to think through the use of that fuel for your vehicle. Also think through the fuel for a generator or chainsaws, log splitters, that kind of thing. because you may not get a new supply for quite a while. So another thing would be good to possibly have some on hand. Maybe just simple practice of don't let your fuel tank in your car get less than half a tank. So at least you have a half a tank always in the car. So just some quick little easy things to think about and do that don't cost a lot of money.
Okay, it's really going to be important to have some food on hand in case the grocery stores shut down or things are disrupted for a while. So you're going to want to have some extra things on your shelf, and you're going to need a place to store them. But you might want to take a trip over to Costco, get some bulk things like rice or oatmeal, and also just some things from your garden. If you've not already canned, maybe you can can and keep some of those things on the shelf as well. Finding some things that have a pretty long expiration date is helpful, but again, you're just going to have to swap things out as you use them and replace it.
All right, something else to consider is your community. Who are your people in the moment when things go really badly? Is that close friends and family that are nearby? How are you going to get a hold of them? You need to have a game plan in place and ready to go for how you're going to communicate with each other and reach those people that you really want to do this with. For us, we have Joanna and Chuck, of course, who are down the road and they're not that far from us. But in addition to that, we have a couple of friends and some family members who we know that we're going to be getting a hold of so that they can come and contribute and be a part of this. Another thing to consider is people who might be nearby or who have skill levels that you don't necessarily have. I anticipate that if things really did ever go poorly, like we're talking about, that you wouldn't necessarily be able to run to the doctor or to the hospital for an emergency. So do you have people that you can be in contact with, who you could ask questions to? That would go for somebody who is really skilled at a certain trade or building things. Maybe somebody who can weld and help you out, or somebody who breeds animals and has done this for years and years. Just, I would kind of go through and make some of those lists in your head of who you could reach out to in a moment when you really need the help. So think through your friends, think through your family, and who you can call on for additional help.
You also need to have a communication plan. You might have a group of friends and family that you want to work with in an emergency situation, but you have to assume that even though you might all have cell phones, what happens if cell towers go out? What happens if there's no power? A good backup, you should always have some redundancies, but something to start with are regular walkie-talkies, and you can go up from there. There's really good resources online. We're going to link those in the description. But in general, have a communication plan with backups. Have a way to talk to people who are close to you, a way to talk to people maybe that are further away. So you can actually get into ham radios, CB radios, and walkie-talkies. But it's really important, not only in the case that you have an emergency, like a medical emergency that you can call for help, but to coordinate your efforts with the community of people that you're going to share resources with. So communication is very important. Do some research, check the links out we have, and maybe find links of your own. But start now, because you might have to order some of these things that you don't have on hand. And with the shipping situation being what it is and manufacturing being what it is, it's better to have these on hand now rather than wait till the last minute.
Okay, so something else you might want to think about is having some books and magazines, some resources on hand if, for instance, the internet shuts down and you have no access. So Chuck and I have on hand a bunch of magazines and a bunch of books that we can reference if we need to regarding gardening, survival guides. We have this magazine called Backwoods Survival Guide. Again, Chuck has talked about this before, but this is called the year-round vegetable gardener. And just several other things. Mother Earth's news. So just to have these things on hand. So we have made some purchases online, even just recently, just so that we're not looking around and unable to figure out what we need to do.
So another thing to consider would be just your homestead safety. Just some items you may be interested in investing in: a good flashlight, maybe a set of binoculars, some ammunition, and of course the firearms to use the ammunition. That could be for your homestead safety. It could also just be for providing for your family by hunting, the animals that are in your area. So those are all things to prepare for and make sure you have on hand and ready.
One of the things that I was really passionate about was making sure that I have enough of my medical supplies on hand to treat the things that I come into contact, especially since I have so many kids that are running around outside and get injured quite frequently. So I just wanted to make sure that we were up on our stock of all of these things. So we use quite a bit of activated charcoal. I of course have my huge selection of essential oils that I use to treat almost everything. I made sure I had some calendula and arnica, some throat drops. We have gauze pads and band-aids. But one of the things that I haven't gotten yet that I am still going to get, it's on my list to do, is a suture kit in case we do need to perform stitches. Now, I really hope that it doesn't come to that I have to do that myself. But if you can't get to the doctor or to the hospital, I want to be able to have that on hand in case it's something that we legit actually need to have. So just make sure that you go through all of your things and that you have on hand what you need. Now, for the most part, this is already how we live. These are things that I typically have on hand, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't running low on anything.